My name is Rebecca Carter, and 3 weeks ago, I watched my own funeral from the back of the church, while my sister Rachel stood at the podium, crying fake tears over my casket and collecting sympathy for losing her beloved twin. What she did not know was that I had been watching her every move for 6 months, documenting her plan to fake my death and steal my $800,000 life insurance policy. But what happened when I walked down that aisle in the middle of her eulogy will shock you more than anything you have ever heard. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about the most twisted family betrayal imaginable and how I got the ultimate revenge, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about sibling rivalry, insurance fraud, and what happens when you underestimate the sister you tried to murder. But before I tell you how I came back from the dead to destroy my sister's life, let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. Rachel and I were born on a cold February morning 32 years ago in Portland, Oregon, identical twins who entered the world 3 minutes apart. From the very beginning, our parents treated those 3 minutes like they represented 3 years of difference in our importance to the family. I was born first, but Rachel was born screaming louder, and somehow that translated into her getting more attention, more sympathy, and more excuses for behavior that would have gotten me into serious trouble. Our mother, Linda Carter, used to joke that Rachel came out of the womb knowing how to manipulate people, and she was not wrong. By the time we were toddlers, Rachel had already learned that tears could get her anything she wanted. While my attempts at honest communication were dismissed as being too serious or demanding, our father, David Carter, worked as a middle manager at an insurance company, a job that paid well enough to support our family but left him exhausted and frequently absent from our daily lives. When he was home, he preferred the easy path of giving Rachel whatever she wanted rather than dealing with the tantrums that would follow if he said no. I learned early that being the good child, the one who followed rules and tried to help, got me less attention than being the dramatic one who created problems. This dynamic became even more pronounced as we started school. Rachel discovered that she could blame me for things she had done wrong, and our teachers, confused by our identical appearance, often believed her version of events over mine. If something went missing from another student's desk, Rachel would claim she saw me take it. If homework was not completed, Rachel would insist that I had distracted her from doing it. The pattern was always the same. Rachel created the problem, then positioned herself as the victim of my supposed bad influence. By middle school, I had learned to document everything I did and everywhere I went, keeping detailed records to protect myself from Rachel's false accusations. But our parents saw my careful note-taking as evidence that I was obsessive and controlling, while they viewed Rachel's chaotic lifestyle as creative and free-spirited. The irony was that I was developing the exact skills that would eventually save my life when Rachel decided to try to murder me. High school brought new challenges as Rachel's manipulative behavior escalated into more serious territory. She started dating older boys who had money and cars, convincing them to buy her expensive gifts and take her to places our parents would never have approved of. When these relationships inevitably ended badly, Rachel would claim that the boys had mistreated or threatened her, generating sympathy and protective responses from our family. But I knew the truth because I had started paying attention to the patterns in Rachel's stories. She would initially praise these boyfriends as wonderful and generous, then gradually introduce complaints about their behavior that conveniently coincided with their unwillingness to continue spending money on her. When they tried to break up with her, Rachel would suddenly discover that they had been abusive or dangerous all along. The most serious incident happened during our junior year when Rachel accused her boyfriend Marcus of stealing money from her purse. Marcus was 17 years old, worked part-time at a grocery store, and came from a family that struggled financially. Rachel claimed he had taken $40 from her wallet while they were at a movie, money she said our father had given her for college application fees. Marcus denied taking the money, but Rachel's tearful performance convinced our parents and school administrators that she was telling the truth. Marcus was suspended from school pending investigation, lost his part-time job due to the theft allegations, and faced potential criminal charges that could have ruined his future. Our father even threatened to press charges and hire a lawyer to make sure Marcus faced serious consequences. But I had seen Rachel take money from our mother's purse that same morning, the exact amount she later claimed Marcus had stolen. I had watched her hide the bills in her bedroom, probably planning to return them before anyone noticed they were missing. When the opportunity arose to frame Marcus for theft, Rachel simply used the money she had already stolen to create evidence for her false accusation. I tried to tell our parents what I had witnessed, but they accused me of being jealous of Rachel's relationship and trying to protect Marcus because I had a crush on him. Rachel cried and claimed that I was lying to hurt her because I had always been jealous of her ability to attract boys who liked her better than me. Our parents believed her completely, and I was grounded for a month for making false accusations against my innocent sister. Marcus's family eventually hired a lawyer who was able to prove that Rachel's timeline of events was impossible based on surveillance footage from the movie theater. The charges were dropped, but the damage to Marcus's reputation and his family's finances had already been done. He transferred to a different school to escape the rumors and suspicion that continued to follow him. That incident taught me several important lessons that would prove crucial years later when Rachel's behavior became literally life-threatening. First, that Rachel was capable of destroying innocent people without any apparent guilt or remorse. Second, that our parents would always believe her lies over my truthful observations. Third, that I needed to be much more careful about gathering evidence if I ever hoped to expose Rachel's manipulative behavior. But the most important lesson was that Rachel's false accusations were not random or impulsive. She carefully calculated the potential benefits of her lies and chose targets who would be difficult to defend against her claims. Marcus had been vulnerable because of his family's financial situation and his lack of social connections that could vouch for his character. Rachel had specifically chosen someone who would struggle to fight back against her accusations. College provided a temporary escape from Rachel's constant drama, as we attended different universities and had minimal contact for 4 years. I studied nursing at Oregon State University, working part-time jobs and taking out student loans to pay for my education. I graduated with honors, passed my nursing boards on the first attempt, and secured a position at Portland General Hospital that offered excellent benefits and professional development opportunities. Rachel, meanwhile, attended Portland Community College for 2 years before dropping out to pursue what she called her artistic career. She had briefly studied graphic design, then photography, then interior decorating, never completing any program or developing any marketable skills. Our parents continued to support her financially, paying for her various educational experiments and artistic supplies while she lived at home and avoided any real responsibilities. When I started working as a nurse, I was finally earning enough money to live independently and build the stable, productive life I had always wanted. I rented a small but nice apartment, bought reliable furniture and appliances, and began saving money for larger goals like purchasing a condo and building retirement security. For the first time in my life, I felt free from Rachel's chaos and manipulation. But Rachel was struggling without her primary source of drama and attention. Living with our parents as an adult was limiting her social opportunities, and her lack of education or job skills made it difficult for her to support herself independently. She began calling me regularly, usually asking for small amounts of money or favors that seemed harmless, but gradually became more frequent and demanding. At first, I was happy to help Rachel occasionally, thinking that maybe she was finally ready to become more responsible, and that our relationship could improve now that we were adults. I lent her money for car repairs, helped her move her belongings when she changed apartments, and even co-signed for a credit card when she claimed she needed it to build credit history for future financial goals. But the pattern that emerged was identical to Rachel's behavior during high school. She would be grateful and affectionate when asking for help, then become distant and critical once she had received what she wanted. She never repaid the money she borrowed, never helped me with anything in return, and often made comments suggesting that I was obligated to support her because I had been luckier or more privileged in some way. Rachel also began spreading rumors among our extended family about my lifestyle and priorities, claiming that I was selfish with money and unwilling to help family members who were struggling. She told our aunts and uncles that I made a lot of money as a nurse, but refused to share it with my sister who was pursuing important artistic work that did not pay well immediately. The truth was that nursing salaries, while decent, were not extravagant, and I was working long hours in a demanding job while trying to pay off student loans and build financial security. Rachel's artistic pursuits consisted mainly of posting photos on social media and occasionally selling handmade jewelry at local craft fairs. She had no business plan, no consistent income, and no realistic understanding of what it would take to build a successful creative career. When I turned 28, I made one of the best financial decisions of my life by purchasing a substantial life insurance policy through my employer. The hospital offered excellent benefits, including the option to buy additional life insurance at group rates that were much lower than individual policies. I chose an $800,000 policy that would provide security for my future family or support my parents if something happened to me. I mentioned this decision to my family during a birthday dinner, explaining that I thought it was important to have adequate life insurance while I was young and healthy and could get the best rates. Rachel seemed unusually interested in the details of my policy, asking questions about how much it cost, how the benefits would be paid, and who I had designated as my beneficiary. At the time, I thought Rachel's questions reflected a new maturity and interest in financial planning. I was pleased that she seemed to be thinking about responsible adult decisions and encouraged her to look into getting her own life insurance once she established a steady income. I even offered to help her research options and understand the different types of policies available. But what I did not realize was that Rachel's questions were not about getting her own insurance. She was researching my policy as a potential source of income for herself, already beginning to formulate the plan that would eventually lead to her attempt to murder me. While I was proud of my responsible financial planning, Rachel was calculating how much money she could gain if something happened to me. 6 months after our 28th birthday celebration, Rachel's behavior began to change in ways that seemed positive at first, but gradually became concerning. She started visiting me more frequently, often dropping by my apartment unannounced with small gifts or offers to help with household tasks. She would ask detailed questions about my work schedule, my social activities, and my daily routines, claiming that she wanted to understand my life better so we could spend more time together. Rachel also began asking about my finances in ways that seemed like sisterly concern but felt increasingly intrusive. She wanted to know how much money I was saving, what my long-term financial goals were, and whether I had made plans for how my assets would be distributed if something happened to me. When I mentioned that I should probably create a will and other estate planning documents, Rachel volunteered to help me research lawyers and legal requirements. At the same time, Rachel's own financial situation was becoming increasingly desperate, though she tried to hide this from our family. She had been evicted from her apartment for non-payment of rent and was secretly staying with various friends while telling our parents that she was house-sitting or helping acquaintances with temporary living arrangements. She had maxed out the credit card I had co-signed for and had defaulted on several other financial obligations, but rather than seeking legitimate employment or asking our family for help with her financial problems, Rachel had begun researching more elaborate solutions to her money troubles. She was spending hours online reading about insurance fraud, estate planning loopholes, and legal requirements for claiming death benefits. She was also studying my personality, my relationships, and my daily habits, looking for ways to exploit my trust and my predictable behavior. Patterns. The first clear warning sign that something was seriously wrong came when I discovered that Rachel had been impersonating me on social media. She had created accounts using variations of my name and photos she had stolen from my phone when visiting my apartment. These fake profiles were posting content about depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts that I had never experienced or expressed. When I confronted Rachel about these fake accounts, she denied creating them and suggested that someone else must be trying to damage my reputation or that I was becoming paranoid about normal social media activity. She claimed that any similarities between the fake posts and our conversations were coincidences, and that I was overreacting to what was probably just spam or automated account creation. But I knew that the fake posts contained specific details about my life that only Rachel could have known, including references to conversations we had had privately and details about my work schedule that she had learned during her recent visits. Someone was deliberately trying to create a false narrative about my mental health and stability, and Rachel was the only person with both the information and the motivation to do so. I also began noticing that items in my apartment had been moved or searched when I was not home. Nothing was missing, but personal documents, financial statements, and computer files showed signs of having been accessed by someone who was trying to be careful, but not careful enough. My laptop was occasionally left open when I always closed it, and files on my desk were arranged differently than I had left them. Most disturbing were the changes to my mail delivery. Letters that should have arrived on specific dates would show up days late, and some envelopes looked like they had been opened and resealed with different adhesive. Bank statements, insurance documents, and medical records were particularly likely to be delayed or tampered with, suggesting that someone was specifically interested in my financial and health information. When I mentioned these concerns to my parents, they suggested that I was probably stressed from work and imagining problems that did not exist. Rachel expressed concern about my mental health and offered to help me find a therapist or support group for dealing with work-related anxiety. She even researched local mental health resources and offered to accompany me to appointments if I thought professional help would be beneficial. At the time, I appreciated Rachel's apparent concern and support, not realizing that she was actually documenting my supposed mental health problems to use as evidence later if she needed to explain suspicious circumstances surrounding my death. Her offers to help me find therapy were designed to create a paper trail, showing that I had been struggling with depression and psychological issues that might lead to suicide or reckless behavior. This pattern continued for several months, with Rachel gradually escalating her research into my life, while simultaneously building a false narrative about my mental state and emotional stability. She was methodically gathering the information and creating the background story she would need to successfully fake my death and claim my life insurance benefits. But Rachel made one critical mistake during this planning phase. She became so focused on researching insurance fraud and death benefit procedures that she failed to cover her digital tracks adequately. When I finally decided to hire a private investigator to find out what was happening, the evidence of Rachel's research and planning was still accessible on devices and accounts that could be traced back to her. I contacted Mitchell's Security Services in early January, 6 months before Rachel put her murder plan into action. I met with investigator Janet Martinez, explaining my concerns about Rachel's behavior and the evidence I had noticed that someone was surveilling my life and impersonating me online. Janet was a former police officer with 15 years of experience in fraud investigation, and she immediately recognized the warning signs of a potentially serious crime in development. Janet's first step was to conduct a comprehensive background check on Rachel, researching her financial history, her criminal record, and her online activities. What she discovered was more alarming than I had expected and provided crucial context for understanding why Rachel might be planning something desperate and dangerous. Rachel's financial situation was much worse than any of us had realized. She owed over $60,000 on credit cards and personal loans, had defaulted on a car loan that resulted in repossession, and was facing legal action from multiple creditors who were seeking wage garnishment and asset seizure. She had been evicted from 3 different apartments in the past 2 years and had been moving between temporary living situations while trying to avoid legal service and debt collection efforts. But the most shocking discovery was that Rachel had been involved in insurance fraud before, though on a smaller scale than what she was apparently planning against me. 3 years earlier, she had filed a fraudulent claim for a car accident that resulted in a substantial settlement for injuries that medical experts later determined were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. 2 years before that, she had received a homeowner's insurance payout for stolen jewelry that she had actually sold to pay gambling debts. Rachel had been systematically defrauding insurance companies for years, always managing to avoid serious consequences because she was skilled at presenting herself as a sympathetic victim, and because the amounts involved were not large enough to trigger intensive investigations. But her methods were becoming more sophisticated, and her financial desperation was driving her toward much more serious crimes. Janet's investigation also revealed that Rachel had been in contact with Kevin Mills, a former insurance investigator who had been fired from his job 3 years earlier for ethical violations and suspected fraud. Kevin had inside knowledge of how insurance investigations were conducted, what types of evidence were considered conclusive, and how to manipulate the claims process to avoid detection. Kevin and Rachel had met through an online forum dedicated to discussing insurance policies and claims procedures, though their communications had quickly moved to private channels where they could discuss more sensitive topics without creating public records. Janet was able to trace some of their communications through recovered data and social media connections, revealing that they had been planning something together for several months. The most disturbing evidence Janet discovered was Rachel's research into methods for causing death that would appear natural or accidental. She had been visiting websites about drug interactions, reading medical literature about conditions that could cause sudden death, and researching remote locations where a body might not be discovered for weeks or months after death occurred. Rachel had also been studying my personal habits and relationships, gathering information that would be crucial for successfully impersonating me or explaining my disappearance to family and friends. She knew my work schedule, my social activities, my financial accounts, and my communication patterns well enough to potentially maintain the illusion that I was alive for several days or weeks after my actual death. Armed with this information, Janet and I developed a comprehensive plan to document Rachel's activities and gather evidence that would be sufficient to ensure her conviction if she proceeded with her apparent plan to harm me. We installed hidden surveillance cameras in my apartment and my car, recorded devices that would capture any attempts Rachel made to drug me or access my personal property, and tracking systems that would monitor her movements and communications. We also created a secure communication system that would allow me to contact law enforcement immediately if Rachel's behavior escalated to an immediate threat, and we developed safety protocols that would protect me during high-risk situations, like family gatherings or private meetings with Rachel. But the most important element of our plan was my decision to allow Rachel to proceed with her scheme while secretly documenting everything she did. Instead of confronting her immediately or involving police before we had conclusive evidence of criminal intent, we decided to let Rachel reveal the full scope of her plan and commit to actions that would constitute attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. This approach was dangerous, but it was necessary to ensure that Rachel would face serious criminal charges and receive a sentence that reflected the premeditated and calculating nature of her crimes. If we stopped her before she actually attempted to harm me, she could claim that her research and planning had been hypothetical, or that she had never seriously intended to follow through with any criminal activity. Over the next 3 months, Janet and I documented Rachel's continued research and planning, her communications with Kevin Mills, and her escalating efforts to gather information about my life and create a false narrative about my mental health. We recorded her visits to my apartment where she searched through my belongings and photographed important documents, and we traced her online activities as she researched specific methods for committing undetectable murder. But the most chilling evidence we gathered was recordings of Rachel's conversations with Kevin where they discussed the technical details of their plan and the timeline for putting it into action. These conversations revealed that Rachel's plan was not just about stealing my life insurance money. It was about completely assuming my identity and living my life while everyone believed I was dead. Rachel had been studying my mannerisms, my speech patterns, and my relationships so that she could impersonate me convincingly in situations where our identical appearance would not be sufficient. She had been practicing my signature, learning details about my job and my coworkers, and even researching medical procedures that could alter her appearance if necessary to maintain her impersonation over time. The plan they developed was sophisticated and terrifying in its attention to detail. Rachel and Kevin intended to drug me during a family gathering, transport my unconscious body to a remote hiking trail, and stage evidence of an accidental death. They would create a scenario where I appeared to have fallen from a cliff while hiking alone, ensuring that my body would be found in a location and condition consistent with accidental death. But the most disturbing aspect of their plan was what they intended to do after my death was confirmed and my life insurance claim was processed. Rachel planned to gradually assume my identity, using our identical appearance and her knowledge of my life to convince people that she was actually me and that she had been the one who survived the hiking accident. She would claim that she had been injured and confused after the accident, explaining any personality changes or memory gaps as the result of head trauma. Over time, she would completely take over my life, living in my apartment, working at my job, and maintaining my relationships, while collecting my life insurance money and accessing my financial accounts. The scope and complexity of Rachel's plan revealed that this was not a desperate or impulsive crime, but a carefully calculated scheme that she had been developing for months. She had considered every detail of how to kill me, how to avoid detection, and how to profit from my death both immediately and long-term. But Rachel had made several critical errors that would ultimately destroy her plan and ensure her conviction. First, she had underestimated my intelligence and my willingness to investigate her suspicious behavior. Second, she had left digital evidence of her research and communications that could be traced back to her. Third, she had involved Kevin Mills, whose criminal history and known association with insurance fraud made him an obvious suspect if anything happened to me. Most importantly, Rachel had failed to consider that I might be prepared for her betrayal and actively working to document her crimes. She assumed that I would remain the trusting, naive sister she had manipulated throughout our childhood, not realizing that years of experience with her lies had taught me to recognize and prepare for her manipulative behavior. In early May, 6 weeks before Rachel put her plan into action, Janet and I made final preparations for what we expected would be Rachel's attempt to drug and kidnap me. We coordinated with local law enforcement to ensure that backup would be available if the situation became immediately dangerous. And we tested our communication and recording systems to make sure we could capture clear evidence of Rachel's criminal actions. We also prepared contingency plans for various scenarios Rachel might attempt, including backup recording devices, emergency contact procedures, and medical precautions in case Rachel succeeded in drugging me before we could intervene. Janet would be monitoring our communications and my location throughout any high-risk encounters, ready to contact police and emergency medical services if necessary. The plan was for me to attend a family dinner that Rachel had suggested, wearing concealed recording devices and maintaining regular contact with Janet throughout the evening. If Rachel attempted to drug me or transport me anywhere against my will, I would signal Janet, who would immediately contact law enforcement and emergency medical personnel, but we also prepared for the possibility that Rachel might succeed in drugging me despite our precautions. I had medical bracelets identifying my blood type and listing allergies to medications Rachel might use, and Janet had detailed information about my medical history and insurance that would be necessary if I required emergency treatment. The family dinner, Rachel suggested, took place on a Saturday evening in mid-May at our parents' house. Rachel had insisted on cooking the meal herself, claiming that she wanted to show appreciation for our family and demonstrate her improving domestic skills. She prepared my favorite foods and seemed unusually attentive and affectionate, behavior that would have been touching if I had not known about her ulterior motives. Throughout dinner, Rachel asked detailed questions about my work schedule for the following week, my plans for the upcoming weekend, and whether I had made any travel arrangements or social commitments that might cause people to expect regular contact with me. She was gathering final intelligence about when I would be missed if I disappeared and how much time she would have to implement her plan before anyone became concerned about my absence. Rachel also spent considerable time discussing hiking and outdoor activities, mentioning several specific trails she had recently discovered and suggesting that we should plan a sisterly hiking trip to spend quality time together in nature. She described the remote locations in detail, emphasizing how peaceful and private they were, perfect for meaningful conversations without distractions from work or social obligations. After dinner, Rachel offered to make coffee and insisted that I relax in the living room while she handled the cleanup. This was when she planned to add the sedative to my coffee, but I was prepared for her attempt. When she brought me the coffee, I pretended to drink it while actually pouring it into a potted plant when she was not looking. Within 30 minutes, I began pretending to feel drowsy and disoriented, following the timeline Rachel would expect if her drugging attempt had been successful. I complained of feeling unusually tired and mentioned that I might be coming down with something, giving Rachel the opening she needed to suggest that she drive me home since I seemed too impaired to drive safely. Rachel immediately volunteered to take me to my apartment, insisting that I should not drive when I was feeling unwell. Our parents supported this suggestion, praising Rachel for being such a caring sister and making sure I got home safely. If they had known that Rachel was actually kidnapping me with the intention of committing murder, their reaction would have been very different. Rachel helped me to her car, supporting my weight as if I were genuinely incapacitated by the drugs she thought she had given me. She was gentle and concerned in front of our parents, playing the role of the devoted sister taking care of her sick twin. But once we were alone in her car, Rachel's demeanor changed completely. Instead of driving toward my apartment, Rachel headed in the opposite direction, toward the remote hiking trails she had described during dinner. As we drove, she made several phone calls to Kevin Mills, updating him on the success of her drugging attempt and confirming the timeline for the next phase of their plan. I listened to their conversations while pretending to be unconscious, recording everything through the hidden devices Janet and I had prepared. Rachel and Kevin discussed the specific location where they planned to stage my death, the positioning of my body that would be most convincing to investigators, and the story Rachel would tell about discovering my body after searching for me when I failed to return from what was supposed to be a solo hiking trip. But the most chilling part of their conversation was Rachel's discussion of how she planned to react when my body was found. She had rehearsed her grief performance, practicing how she would cry, what she would say to police and reporters, and how she would behave during the funeral and insurance claim process. She had even planned the eulogy she would deliver at my memorial service. Rachel's cold, calculating tone as she discussed my murder and her plans to profit from my death was more disturbing than I had anticipated, even knowing what she was capable of. She spoke about killing me with the same detachment she might use to discuss a business transaction, focusing entirely on the practical details and potential complications, rather than showing any emotion about ending her sister's life. When we reached the hiking trail parking area, Kevin Mills was waiting with additional equipment for staging the accident. He had brought ropes, climbing gear, and other props that would make the scene look like I had been hiking alone when I fell from the cliff. He had also researched the area extensively, choosing a location where my body would eventually be found, but not so quickly that investigators would have time to detect evidence of foul play. Rachel and Kevin carried what they thought was my unconscious body along the hiking trail for nearly 2 miles, reaching the cliff area they had selected for staging my death. They spent over an hour arranging fake evidence of my presence at the scene, including personal items from my apartment that Rachel had stolen during her previous visits. They took photographs that they planned to use as evidence of my hiking activity, created fake social media posts about my solo hiking plans that would be discovered later, and even staged my car at the trailhead to support their story about my supposed hiking expedition. The level of detail and preparation they had invested in this plan was truly extraordinary. But the most disturbing moment came when Rachel stood over what she thought was my dead body and began practicing her grief performance for the investigators who would eventually question her about my disappearance. She rehearsed how she would describe our close relationship, how worried she had become when I failed to return from my hike, and how devastated she was to lose her beloved twin sister. Watching. Rachel practiced fake grief over my supposedly dead body while planning to steal my identity and my life. Insurance money was one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. The complete absence of genuine emotion or remorse in her performance revealed the depth of her narcissism and her complete inability to see me as a human being rather than a source of financial benefit. That was when I decided the charade had gone on long enough. I sat up, looked directly at Rachel, and said, "Hello, Rachel. How is your acting career coming along? Planning any Oscar-worthy performances in the near future?" The look on Rachel's face was something I will treasure for the rest of my life. Pure terror, followed by rage, followed by desperate calculation as she tried to figure out how to salvage her plan. She immediately began denying everything, claiming that she had been trying to help me after I had become sick during our family dinner, and that everything I had witnessed was a misunderstanding. Kevin Mills immediately tried to run, but law enforcement officers who had been monitoring our location were already surrounding the area. Janet had been tracking our movement through GPS devices and had coordinated with police to arrest both Rachel and Kevin in the act of attempting to commit murder and insurance fraud. Both Rachel and Kevin were arrested on charges that included attempted murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, kidnapping, and identity theft. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including recordings of their conversations, video footage of them staging my death, and documentation of their months of planning and preparation. The arrests made local news immediately, with reporters describing the case as one of the most elaborate insurance fraud schemes ever attempted in Oregon. The story of identical twins, one of whom had tried to murder the other to steal her life insurance money, captured public attention and generated extensive media coverage. But Rachel's legal troubles were just beginning. The investigation into her background revealed a pattern of fraudulent behavior that extended back several years and involved multiple victims and insurance companies. Prosecutors were able to file additional charges related to her previous fraud schemes, significantly increasing the potential prison sentence she would face if convicted. The most damaging evidence against Rachel came from her own recorded words during the staged hiking trip. Her detailed discussions of how to position my body, how to create convincing evidence of an accident, and how to manipulate investigators and insurance adjusters demonstrated clear premeditation and a sophisticated understanding of the crime she was attempting to commit. Rachel's trial began 6 months after her arrest and lasted for 3 weeks, during which the full scope of her planning and her history of fraudulent behavior was revealed to the jury. The prosecution presented recordings of her conversations with Kevin Mills, surveillance footage of her researching my life and stealing my personal information, and evidence of her previous insurance fraud convictions. The defense attempted to argue that Rachel had been coerced by Kevin Mills and had never seriously intended to harm me. But the evidence clearly showed that she had been the driving force behind the plan and that Kevin had been recruited to help her rather than the other way around. Rachel's own words on the recordings made it impossible to claim that she had been an unwilling participant. The most powerful moment of the trial came when the prosecution played the recording of Rachel practicing her grief performance over what she thought was my dead body. The jury's reaction to hearing Rachel rehearse fake tears and false expressions of sisterly love while planning to steal my identity was immediate and visceral. When it came time for Rachel to testify in her own defense, she attempted to portray herself as the victim of a manipulative relationship with Kevin Mills and claimed that she had been driven to desperate actions by financial pressure and mental health problems. She insisted that she loved me and would never have actually harmed me, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. But during cross-examination, the prosecutor presented evidence that Rachel had been researching methods for undetectable murder for over a year before she met Kevin Mills, proving that her plan to kill me had not been Kevin's idea or the result of his manipulation. Rachel had been planning my murder independently and had recruited Kevin, specifically because of his expertise in insurance fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Rachel was sentenced to 22 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years, one of the harshest sentences ever imposed for insurance fraud in Oregon. The judge noted that the premeditated nature of Rachel's crimes and her complete lack of remorse made her a continuing danger to society. Kevin Mills received a sentence of 18 years for his role in the conspiracy, though his cooperation with prosecutors in other fraud cases resulted in a reduction of his minimum parole eligibility. His detailed testimony about the technical aspects of their plan provided crucial evidence for Rachel's conviction and helped prosecutors understand the full scope of their criminal enterprise. But my story does not end with Rachel's conviction. Remember when I mentioned showing up at my own funeral? That extraordinary event took place during the period between Rachel's arrest and her trial, when she was released on bail and still maintaining her innocence to our family and the media. You see, despite the overwhelming evidence against Rachel, our parents and some extended family members continued to believe that she was being unfairly persecuted by overzealous prosecutors who did not understand the true nature of our relationship. Rachel had convinced them that her arrest was the result of a misunderstanding, and that I was exaggerating or misinterpreting her actions because of paranoia or mental health issues. Our mother, Linda, was particularly susceptible to Rachel's manipulation and refused to believe that her daughter could be capable of attempted murder. She visited Rachel regularly in jail, provided money for her legal defense, and even organized family meetings to coordinate support for Rachel during her legal proceedings. During one of these family meetings, our father suggested that the stress of the situation was affecting everyone's mental health and that the family needed to come together to support each other during this difficult time. He proposed that we hold a memorial service for the relationship I had supposedly destroyed by falsely accusing Rachel of crimes she had never committed. Our mother enthusiastically supported this idea, claiming that a formal ceremony would help the family heal from the damage my accusations had caused and demonstrate our continuing love for Rachel despite her legal troubles. She began planning what was essentially a funeral for my character and my relationship with the family, complete with flowers, eulogies, and a reception afterward. When I learned about this planned memorial service, I initially felt hurt and angry that my own parents were treating me like the villain in a situation where I was clearly the victim. But then I realized that this event provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate Rachel's manipulative behavior and force our family to confront the truth about her character. Decided to let the memorial service proceed exactly as planned, but I would attend as a surprise guest to witness Rachel's performance and reveal the extent of her continued deception. I wanted our relatives, family, friends, and anyone who still believed Rachel's lies to see for themselves what kind of person she really was, beneath her facade of wounded innocence. The memorial service was held at our childhood church on a Saturday afternoon in September, 6 weeks before Rachel's trial was scheduled to begin. Our mother had invited everyone from our extended family, plus friends and neighbors who had known us growing up, telling them that this was an opportunity to show support for Rachel and pray for our family's healing. I arrived early and positioned myself in the back of the church, wearing dark sunglasses and a hat to avoid immediate recognition. As people filed into the church, I listened to conversations about Rachel's situation and was disturbed by how many people had accepted her version of events without question. Several relatives commented on how tragic it was that Rachel was being persecuted for trying to help her troubled sister, and how my paranoid accusations had torn apart what had once been a close family. Family friends expressed sympathy for our parents, who were dealing with the shame and heartbreak of having one daughter destroy the other's life through false allegations. But the most disturbing comments came from people who claimed to understand Rachel's situation because they had dealt with similar family mental health crises. They spoke knowingly about how paranoid delusions could cause someone to turn against their closest relatives and how difficult it was to get help for family members who refused to acknowledge their psychological problems. Rachel arrived at the church dressed in black, playing the role of the grieving sister mourning the loss of our relationship. She moved through the crowd, accepting condolences and support, tears streaming down her face as she described how devastated she was by my betrayal and how much she missed the close bond we had shared before my mental health problems destroyed our family. Our parents flanked Rachel throughout the reception before the service, introducing her to people who had not seen us in years and explaining how much she had suffered since my false accusations had destroyed her reputation and subjected her to criminal prosecution. Our mother was particularly emotional, describing Rachel as a victim of my jealousy and instability. When the formal memorial service began, our father served as the master of ceremonies, explaining to the congregation that they were gathered to remember and honor the loving relationship that had once existed between his twin daughters before tragedy and mental illness had torn them apart forever. He spoke about our childhood, describing Rachel and me as inseparable best friends who had shared everything and supported each other through every challenge. He told stories about our matching outfits, our secret twin language, and our fierce loyalty to each other during our early years. Every word he spoke was true about our childhood, but ignored the decades of manipulation and betrayal that had followed. Our mother delivered the next eulogy, focusing on Rachel's character and her devotion to family. She described Rachel as compassionate, generous, and forgiving, someone who had continued to love me despite my increasingly erratic and hurtful behavior. She praised Rachel's attempts to get me professional help and her willingness to forgive my false accusations even though they had destroyed her life. Several extended family members also spoke, sharing memories of family gatherings where Rachel and I had seemed happy together and expressing hope that someday I would recover from my mental health problems and be able to repair the damage I had caused. Their genuine concern and affection for both of us made their misguided support for Rachel even more painful to witness. But the climax of the service came when Rachel herself approached the podium to deliver what she described as a tribute to our lost sisterhood. She spoke for nearly 20 minutes about how much she loved me, how she missed our close relationship, and how she continued to pray for my recovery and eventual return to the family. Rachel's performance was masterful, combining just the right amount of sadness, forgiveness, and hope to convince everyone present that she was the innocent victim of my psychological breakdown. She spoke about specific memories from our childhood, described her ongoing efforts to understand and help me, and expressed her commitment to supporting me even though I had tried to destroy her life. She told the congregation that she did not blame me for my false accusations, because she understood that mental illness could cause people to turn against those who loved them most. She asked everyone to pray for my healing and to remember the good times we had shared rather than focusing on the painful present situation. But what Rachel did not know was that I had been recording her entire performance, just as I had recorded her conversations during the planning of my murder. Every word of her memorial service speech would become evidence in her trial, demonstrating her continued willingness to lie and manipulate, even when facing serious criminal charges. As Rachel concluded her eulogy and began walking back to her seat, I stood up in the back of the church and began walking down the center aisle toward the altar. The reaction was immediate and electric. People began gasping, pointing, and calling out in shock as they realized that the sister who was supposedly too mentally ill to attend her own memorial service was walking among them. I walked slowly and deliberately, making eye contact with relatives and family friends who had accepted Rachel's lies without question. I could see the confusion and dawning realization on their faces as they began to understand that they had been manipulated, just as thoroughly as I had been throughout our childhood. When I reached the front of the church, I stepped up to the podium where Rachel stood frozen in terror and disbelief. I took the microphone from her trembling hands and turned to address the congregation that had gathered to mourn our relationship based on her lies. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said calmly. "Thank you all for coming to what you believed was a memorial service for the relationship between Rachel and me. I appreciate your concern for our family and your desire to show support during what you thought was a difficult time." The church was completely silent except for the sound of Rachel's sobbing, though these were tears of despair and panic rather than the fake grief she had been displaying moments earlier. However, I continued, "I think it is important for everyone here to understand what really happened between Rachel and me, and why she is currently facing criminal charges for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and identity theft." I spent the next 15 minutes methodically explaining to the congregation exactly what Rachel had done, starting with her history of insurance fraud and financial manipulation, and culminating in her detailed plan to drug me, stage my death, and steal both my life insurance money and my identity. I played selected excerpts from the recordings Janet and I had made during Rachel's attempted murder, including her conversations with Kevin Mills about how to position my body and her practice session for the grief performance she planned to give to investigators. The congregation listened in horrified silence as they heard Rachel discuss my murder with the same casual tone she might use to plan a shopping trip. I also presented copies of evidence that had been used in Rachel's prosecution, including documentation of her previous fraud convictions, her financial problems, and her months of research into methods for committing undetectable murder. The scope and premeditation of her plan became clear as I described the elaborate preparations she had made, but the most powerful moment came when I addressed the issue of family loyalty and the difference between supporting someone through difficult times versus enabling their destructive and criminal behavior. I explained that Rachel's trial was not about mental illness or family conflict, but about a calculated attempt to commit murder for financial gain. I told the congregation that their continued support for Rachel was not helping her become a better person, but was actually reinforcing her belief that she could manipulate people indefinitely without facing real consequences for her actions. I asked them to consider whether their sympathy was being directed toward the actual victim or toward someone who had expertly manipulated their emotions. By the time I finished speaking, the atmosphere in the church had completely changed. Instead of a memorial service for a tragic family breakdown, it had become a revelation about the extent of Rachel's deception and manipulation. People were looking at Rachel with expressions of shock, disgust, and betrayal as they realized how thoroughly she had lied to them. Our parents were among the most affected, as they began to understand that their lifelong pattern of believing Rachel over me had enabled and encouraged her increasingly dangerous behavior. Our mother was crying, but these were tears of shame and realization, rather than sympathy for Rachel's supposed persecution. Several relatives approached me after my presentation to apologize for their support of Rachel and to express their horror at learning the truth about her attempted murder. They had genuinely believed that family loyalty required them to support Rachel during her legal troubles, not realizing that they were actually supporting someone who had tried to commit one of the most serious crimes possible. The revelation also prompted several family members to reconsider their own interactions with Rachel over the years, recognizing patterns of manipulation and deception that they had previously dismissed or ignored. Stories began emerging about money that had gone missing during family gatherings, false accusations Rachel had made against other relatives, and suspicious incidents that made more sense in light of her revealed character. But perhaps the most significant outcome of my funeral appearance was the impact it had on our parents' relationship with Rachel. Witnessing her elaborate deception firsthand, and realizing how she had manipulated their emotions to gain support for her criminal behavior, finally opened their eyes to the pattern that had been developing throughout our lives. Our father, who had spent decades making excuses for Rachel's behavior and dismissing my concerns as jealousy or overreaction, was forced to confront the reality that his favoritism had enabled someone capable of attempted murder. Our mother, who had always portrayed Rachel as the more vulnerable twin who needed extra protection and support, had to acknowledge that her protection had been directed toward a predator rather than a victim. The memorial service that was supposed to demonstrate family support for Rachel instead became the catalyst for her complete isolation from everyone who had previously believed her lies. By the time her trial began 2 months later, Rachel had no family support, no character witnesses, and no one willing to testify on her behalf about her supposed good character. The trial itself was swift and decisive, with the prosecution presenting overwhelming evidence of Rachel's guilt and the defense struggling to find any credible way to minimize her culpability. The recordings I had made during her attempted murder, combined with the evidence of her previous fraud convictions and her months of planning, made it impossible for anyone to believe that her actions had been impulsive or that she had been coerced by Kevin Mills. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. When the forewoman read the verdict, Rachel collapsed in her chair, apparently realizing for the first time that her manipulation and lies would no longer protect her from the consequences of her actions. During the sentencing phase, the judge noted that Rachel's crimes represented a level of premeditation and callousness that was rarely seen even in murder cases. The fact that she had targeted her own twin sister, someone who trusted her completely, made her actions particularly heinous and demonstrated a complete absence of empathy or normal human emotion. Rachel was sentenced to 22 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. The judge also ordered her to pay restitution for the costs of the investigation and prosecution, though her complete lack of assets made it unlikely that any money would ever be recovered. Kevin Mills, who had cooperated with prosecutors and provided detailed testimony about the technical aspects of their plan, received a sentence of 18 years with the possibility of parole after 12 years. His cooperation had been valuable in understanding how Rachel had recruited him and how their conspiracy had developed. But his knowledge and experience in insurance fraud made him a dangerous accomplice who deserved significant punishment. The conclusion of Rachel's trial marked the end of the most terrifying and traumatic period of my life, but it also represented the beginning of a new chapter where I could finally live without the constant threat of Rachel's manipulation and violence. For the first time since childhood, I did not have to worry about false accusations, stolen belongings, or elaborate schemes designed to harm me for Rachel's benefit. The aftermath of Rachel's conviction also brought unexpected positive changes to my relationship with our parents and extended family. The revelation of Rachel's true character forced everyone to reevaluate their assumptions about our family dynamics and to acknowledge the unfair treatment I had endured for decades. Our father, in particular, made significant efforts to repair our relationship and to understand how his favoritism toward Rachel had contributed to the dangerous situation that had developed. He began attending therapy to address his own patterns of enabling behavior and to learn how to build healthier family relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. Our mother struggled more with accepting responsibility for her role in enabling Rachel's behavior, but she gradually began to acknowledge the ways her protection of Rachel had harmed both of her daughters. She started making an effort to listen to my perspective and to validate my experiences rather than dismissing them as overreaction or jealousy. The extended family members who had initially supported Rachel during her legal troubles also made efforts to rebuild their relationships with me and to demonstrate that they understood the truth about what had happened. Many of them had been genuinely deceived by Rachel's manipulation and felt embarrassed about their initial reaction to her arrest. But perhaps the most significant change was in my own sense of safety and freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I could make decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what would protect me from Rachel's retaliation. I no longer had to document my activities, secure my belongings, or worry about false accusations that could damage my reputation or career. I was able to focus on rebuilding my life and pursuing goals that had been delayed or abandoned due to the stress of dealing with Rachel's constant threats and manipulation. I applied for a promotion at the hospital that I had previously avoided because I was afraid Rachel would sabotage my professional reputation. I began dating again, something I had avoided because I was worried about exposing potential partners to Rachel's harmful behavior. Most importantly, I was able to develop genuine friendships and family, relationships based on trust and mutual respect, rather than the constant vigilance and self-protection that had characterized my interactions during the years when Rachel was actively planning to harm me. Today, I am 34 years old, working as a senior nurse at Portland General Hospital, and in a committed relationship with someone who understands and supports my journey of recovery from family trauma. I have maintained my life insurance policy, though I have changed the beneficiary to ensure that Rachel can never benefit from my death regardless of any future circumstances. I still receive occasional letters from Rachel in prison, usually around holidays or significant dates, asking for forgiveness and claiming that she has learned from her mistakes. She writes that she was desperate and not thinking clearly when she planned my murder, and that she never really intended to go through with harming me permanently. I do not respond to these letters. Rachel had months to reconsider her plan and choose a different path, but she continued with her scheme right up until the moment she was arrested while staging my death. Her actions were not the result of temporary desperation or poor judgment, but the culmination of a lifetime pattern of lying, manipulating, and believing that she deserved whatever she could take from other people. The most recent letter I received from Rachel included an apology that was clearly designed to manipulate my emotions and generate sympathy for her situation. She wrote about how much she missed our family, how sorry she was for the pain she had caused, and how she hoped that someday I would be able to forgive her and help her rebuild her life after prison. But Rachel's apology contained the same manipulative elements that had characterized her behavior throughout our lives. She focused on her own suffering and loneliness, minimized the seriousness of her crimes by describing them as mistakes rather than deliberate choices, and implied that my forgiveness was necessary for her healing and rehabilitation. What Rachel's letters do not contain is any genuine acknowledgement of the terror and trauma she caused, any understanding of how her actions affected my ability to trust other people, or any recognition that her behavior was part of a lifelong pattern rather than an isolated incident. Her apologies are focused entirely on her own needs and desires rather than on the harm she caused to her victim. I have learned that forgiveness is not something that can be demanded or manipulated, and that reconciliation is not possible with someone who continues to demonstrate the same dishonest and self-serving attitudes that led to their harmful behavior in the first place. Rachel's letters confirm that prison has not changed her fundamental character or her belief that she deserves sympathy and support despite attempting to murder her own sister. My experience with Rachel has taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation, protecting myself from people who might try to harm me, and building relationships based on genuine care and respect rather than obligation or guilt. These lessons have been painful to learn, but they have also given me the tools to create a safer and more authentic life. I now work with support groups for people who have experienced violence or threats from family members, sharing my story to help others recognize warning signs and take protective action before dangerous situations escalate beyond their control. Many people struggle with the idea that family members could be capable of serious harm, and my experience demonstrates that blood relationships do not guarantee safety or loyalty. The most important message I try to convey is that trusting your instincts about suspicious or threatening behavior can literally save your life, even when other people dismiss your concerns as paranoia or overreaction. Rachel's plan succeeded, as far as it did because she correctly calculated that most people would not believe her own sister could be capable of attempted murder. I also emphasize the importance of documenting suspicious behavior and seeking professional help when family dynamics become potentially dangerous. The investigation and evidence gathering that ultimately led to Rachel's conviction required months of careful planning and coordination with law enforcement professionals who understood the seriousness of the threat. Looking back on this experience, I realized that my survival was not just a matter of luck or Rachel's incompetence, but the result of my willingness to take protective action despite pressure from family members who wanted me to ignore the warning signs and maintain normal relationships. Rachel's plan failed because she underestimated my intelligence and my determination to protect myself from her harmful behavior. She assumed that I would remain the passive, trusting sister she had manipulated throughout our childhood, not realizing that her years of lies and betrayals had actually taught me to recognize and prepare for her deceptive tactics. The $800,000 life insurance policy that Rachel tried to steal through my murder is still in effect, serving as a reminder of how much my life is worth and how important it is to protect myself from people who might see me as a source of financial benefit rather than a human being deserving of love and respect. But the most valuable outcome of this traumatic experience has been my understanding of the difference between genuine family relationships and the toxic dynamics that can develop when manipulation and favoritism Replace honest communication and mutual support. Not all family relationships are healthy or worth preserving, and sometimes protecting yourself requires cutting ties with relatives who demonstrate that they are capable of serious harm. My relationship with our parents has slowly improved as they have worked to address their own enabling behaviors and to understand how their favoritism contributed to the dangerous situation that developed. Our family will never be the same as it was before Rachel's attempted murder, but it is healthier and more honest than it had been in years. The extended family members who initially supported Rachel have also made efforts to rebuild trust and to demonstrate that they understand the truth about what happened. Many of them had been genuinely deceived by Rachel's manipulation and feel responsible for not recognizing the warning signs of her dangerous behavior earlier. But the most significant change has been in my own sense of agency and self-worth. I no longer define myself as Rachel's victim or as someone who needs to prove her value through accommodation and self-sacrifice. I am a survivor who took effective action to protect herself and to ensure that a dangerous person faced appropriate consequences for her crimes. Rachel's parole hearing is scheduled for 10 years from now, when she will have served the minimum required sentence for her attempted murder conviction. I plan to attend that hearing to ensure that parole board members understand the full scope of her planning and the ongoing danger she could represent to other potential victims if released early. I will present evidence of Rachel's continued manipulation attempts through her prison letters, her refusal to take genuine responsibility for her actions, and her persistent belief that she deserves sympathy and support despite attempting to commit one of the most serious crimes possible. I will argue that her release would represent a danger to public safety and that she has not demonstrated the genuine rehabilitation that would justify parole. But regardless of what happens at Rachel's parole hearing, I am confident in my ability to protect myself and to build a life based on genuine relationships and authentic experiences rather than fear and vigilance. Rachel's attempt to destroy my life ultimately made me stronger and more capable of recognizing and responding to threats from people who might try to harm me. Have you ever discovered that someone in your family was planning to betray or harm you in a serious way? How did you protect yourself when you realized that a relative might be dangerous to your safety or well-being? What warning signs should people watch for when family members start asking suspicious questions about finances, insurance, or personal information? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize dangerous behavior before it escalates to a life-threatening situation. If this story shocked you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family betrayal, survival, and the importance of trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. Remember to share this with someone who might need to hear that family relationships should be based on love and genuine care, not manipulation, exploitation, or violence. Thank you for listening, and remember that you have the right to protect yourself from anyone who threatens your safety, even if they happen to share your DNA and your childhood memories.